Well, Mom's basically our live-in maid now that she's retired, my daughter-in-law Melissa said with a laugh as she reached for another piece of garlic bread, and everyone around the dinner table chuckled softly like she had made the world's funniest joke. I smiled too. At least I think I did. After 41 years working 12-hour shifts as a nurse at St. Mary's Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, I had learned how to smile through exhaustion, through grief, through humiliation. But under the table, my hands trembled so badly that my fork rattled lightly against my plate. The sound disappeared beneath the noise of dishes and conversation, unnoticed by everyone except me. The dining room smelled like roasted chicken, buttered corn, and the lemon candle I had lit an hour before everyone arrived. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking. Not because anyone asked me to. Because old habits die hard. Because mothers keep trying long after they should stop. Jason sat beside Melissa scrolling through his phone, while their daughter Sophie colored quietly with crayons near the kitchen island. My daughter Claire leaned back in her chair sipping white wine, barely looking up as Melissa kept talking. Seriously, Eleanor's retirement has changed our lives, she said. I don't know how we survived before. Another laugh. Another little joke. Another tiny cut pretending to be harmless. I looked down at my mashed potatoes and forced myself to take another bite even though my stomach had suddenly gone tight. 6 months earlier, on my retirement day, this same family had thrown me a small backyard barbecue. Jason hugged me and said, "You've done enough for everyone else, Mom. It's finally your turn now." I remember believing him. God help me, I really did. I remember sitting on the patio with a paper plate balanced on my lap while summer fireflies flickered across the yard. For the first time in decades, my future had felt peaceful. I was going to sleep in past 6 in the morning. I was going to visit Maine in the fall, and see the coastline Robert and I always talked about before he passed away. I was going to take watercolor classes at the community center downtown. Maybe even join the gardening club Margaret kept inviting me to. Small dreams. Quiet dreams. The kind you earn after spending most of your life taking care of everyone else. But retirement didn't become rest. It became availability. At first it seemed harmless. Jason asked if I could pick Sophie up from school, just for a few days, because Melissa had meetings. Claire dropped off 2 baskets of laundry one Saturday because her apartment dryer had stopped working. Then Melissa gave me a garage code for convenience. Soon I was inside their house more than my own. Packing lunches. Folding towels. Wiping kitchen counters. Picking up cereal boxes from the floor while Melissa rushed between yoga classes and real estate appointments. Nobody ever officially asked me to become responsible for their lives. It happened slowly, quietly, one favor at a time. Like snow gathering on tree branches before the weight finally snaps them in half. "Mom, you didn't refill the iced tea," Claire said suddenly, sliding her empty glass toward me without looking up from her phone. The table went silent for half a second. Just long enough for everyone to wait and see if I would stand up automatically like I always did. And I did. Of course I did. I pushed my chair back and carried the pitcher from the kitchen while Melissa kept talking about an upcoming weekend spa trip she and Jason were planning. "Must be nice," Claire joked. "At least one of us gets a break." Melissa smirked toward me. "Well, Eleanor doesn't exactly have a stressful schedule anymore." Another laugh floated around the table. Sophie looked up from her coloring book then. Her little blue eyes moved from Melissa to me, confused but observant in the way children often are. "Grandma works a lot," she said quietly. Nobody answered her. Jason just reached for another dinner roll while Melissa changed the subject. But Sophie's words stayed with me the rest of the evening. Grandma works a lot. I noticed things after that. Things I had ignored before. The way Jason no longer asked how I was doing. The way Melissa left grocery lists on my counter instead of asking politely. The way Claire called only when she needed something. Somewhere. Between retirement and family dinners, I had stopped being Eleanor. I had stopped being mom. I had become useful. And useful things, eventually, stop being appreciated. They only get expected. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise out of pure habit. For 41 years my body had learned to rise before daylight, even when I no longer needed to. The house was quiet except for the soft humming of the refrigerator and the ticking kitchen clock above the stove. I stood barefoot in my kitchen wearing Robert's old gray cardigan and stared out the window at the empty street while the coffee brewed. The sky over Columbus looked pale and washed out, the kind of cold October morning that made everything feel still. For a few minutes, I let myself imagine a different life. One where retirement meant peace. One where my mornings belonged to me. Then my phone buzzed against the counter. A text from Melissa. Can you pick Sophie up at 3 today? Jason and I have appointments. No good morning. No please. Just another task waiting for me before I had even finished my first cup of coffee. 10 minutes later another message arrived. This one from Claire. Can I drop off some groceries later? Also my bathroom sink is leaking again. I stared at both texts while steam curled from my coffee mug. It amazed me sometimes how quickly people adjusted to your constant availability. 6 months earlier they used to ask if I had time. Now they assumed I did. By 8:30 I was standing in line at the grocery store buying almond milk Melissa liked, the dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets Sophie would eat, and paper towels because Jason said they kept forgetting to pick some up. The cashier smiled politely while scanning my cart. Big family, she asked. I nodded automatically. Something like that. Outside, a sharp wind cut through the parking lot. My lower back ached as I loaded grocery bags into my trunk, but I ignored it the same way I had ignored headaches and exhaustion during decades of hospital shifts. Some pains become background noise after enough years. Around noon, Claire arrived at my house carrying 2 overstuffed laundry baskets and a plastic bag full of groceries. She barely stepped inside before talking. Mom, thank God you are home. I have been running around all morning. She dropped the baskets beside the washer and opened my refrigerator like she lived there. I bought turkey slices because Sophie likes them, and Jason said you were probably low on eggs. Probably low on eggs. I almost laughed at that. Somehow my kitchen had become everyone's kitchen except mine. Claire leaned against the counter scrolling through her phone, while I unpacked the groceries she brought into my own house. Also, she added casually, Melissa is stressed lately, so maybe try not to argue with her about helping out. She says you have seemed a little distant. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. My daughter wore expensive sneakers and gold hoop earrings while talking about me as if I were an employee causing tension in the workplace. Distant, I repeated quietly. Claire shrugged. You know how Melissa is. Yes. I did know exactly how Melissa was. The washing machine rumbled to life behind us while Claire checked a text message and smiled down at her screen. I wondered if she remembered the years I worked night shifts and still showed up at every school concert, every soccer game, every parent meeting. I wondered if any of them remembered. At 2:15 I drove to Sophie's elementary school with a container of apple slices and peanut butter crackers on the passenger seat, because Melissa forgot to pack her a snack again. Children poured out through the front doors in bright jackets and oversized backpacks while parents waited beside SUVs lined along the curb. Sophie spotted my car immediately and smiled so hard her front tooth gap showed. Grandma, she yelled, climbing into the back seat. Her happiness hit me like sunlight through clouds. Did you have a good day? I asked. Mostly, she said while buckling her seat belt. Mrs. Patterson says I talk too much during math. I smiled despite myself. Sophie talked the way birds sang. Constantly and without apology. We stopped for hot chocolate on the way home because the wind had turned bitter cold. Sophie sat across from me inside the small cafe swinging her legs beneath the chair while Whipped cream clung to the tip of her nose. Mom says you are lucky you are retired, she said suddenly. I stirred my coffee slowly. Does she? Sophie nodded. Because now you get to help everybody all the time. The words were innocent. Honest. That was what made them hurt. I looked around the cafe, then at the college students typing on laptops, and the young couple laughing quietly near the window. Everyone looked busy building lives of their own while mine had somehow become an extension of everyone else's. Sophie smiled at me across the table. I like when you pick me up though, she said softly. I reached across and squeezed her little hand. I like seeing you too, sweetheart. And I meant it. That was the worst part of all. Love made it easy to ignore the difference between being needed and being used. By Friday evening, my house no longer felt like my home. It felt like a waiting room between errands. Claire's laundry still sat folded neatly in stacks across my dining room table because she had not come back to pick it up. Melissa's casserole dish soaked in my sink beside Sophie's glitter-covered craft supplies from Tuesday afternoon. A pair of Jason's running shoes sat near my front door, where he kicked them off 2 nights earlier, after stopping by to grab dinner. Everywhere I looked, pieces of other people's lives had spread through the rooms I used to keep so carefully ordered. I stood in the hallway holding a basket of tiny socks, and felt suddenly exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. Around 6 o'clock, Jason let himself in using the garage code Melissa convinced me to share months earlier. The door opened with its usual mechanical groan followed by hurried footsteps across the mudroom floor. Mom, he called. You home? I stepped into the kitchen carrying the basket. I am right here. Jason loosened his tie while opening the refrigerator without asking. Long day, he muttered, grabbing a bottled water. Melissa is stuck showing a property across town, so Sophie needs dinner before soccer practice. I looked at him for a moment. Hello would have been nice first. He blinked like the thought genuinely surprised him. Right. Sorry. Hey, Mom. Then he smiled briefly and moved on as if basic politeness was just another task to check off a list. Sophie ran in behind him wearing pink shin guards and carrying a backpack almost half her size. Grandma, she yelled happily before wrapping her arms around my waist. The warmth of that small hug softened something sharp inside me. Can we have spaghetti? She asked. Jason glanced at the stove. Perfect. I knew you would already have something planned. That sentence settled heavily in the room. I knew you would already have something planned. Not thank you. Not do you mind. Just expectation. I turned slowly toward the pantry and reached for a box of pasta while Jason sat at the kitchen island typing on his phone. Melissa says we might need you tomorrow too, he added casually. Her parents are coming Sunday, and she wants time to clean the house. I filled a pot with water and placed it on the stove. Tomorrow is Saturday. Exactly. He looked up briefly. You are retired, Mom. There it was again. That word. Retired. The way they used it now sounded less like a stage of life and more like a permanent condition. Available. Waiting. Existing in the background until needed. While the spaghetti boiled, Sophie sat at the counter drawing pictures with colored pencils she kept in one of my kitchen drawers. She had slowly left pieces of herself all over my house too. Tiny sneakers by the back door. A toothbrush in the upstairs bathroom. Cartoon bandages in my medicine cabinet. Sometimes I wondered if everyone had quietly moved into my life without ever noticing they pushed me out of it first. Dinner passed in the usual blur of conversations that barely included me. Jason talked about work deadlines. Sophie described a playground argument at recess. Melissa arrived 20 minutes late, still wearing high heels and carrying her laptop bag. Thank God, she sighed dramatically after seeing the plates already on the table. I have not eaten all day. Then she kissed Sophie's forehead and sat down without once asking if I needed help carrying dishes. Halfway through dinner, Melissa frowned slightly at the spaghetti sauce. "Did you use dried basil instead of fresh?" she asked. I looked at her quietly. "Yes. The grocery store was out." "Oh." She took another bite. "Fresh tastes better." Silence settled over the table for a second. Jason kept eating. Sophie looked down at her plate. And something inside me shifted almost painfully. Not because of the basil. Because after everything I did every single day, the only thing anyone noticed was what I had not done perfectly. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen wiping down counters long after they were already clean. The dishwasher hummed softly while rain tapped against the windows over the sink. I caught my reflection in the dark glass. Silver hair pulled back loosely. Tired eyes. Hands rough from years of bleach, soap, and hospital sanitizer. I suddenly remembered something Robert told me once during the hardest years of raising Jason and Claire. "If you keep giving people everything," he said quietly while helping me dry dishes one winter evening, "they forget it costs you something." At the time, I thought he was worried about my energy. I did not realize he was warning me about my future. Sunday afternoon arrived cold and gray, with steady rain tapping against the living room windows while I vacuumed crumbs from beneath my own dining table before Melissa's parents came over for dinner. My lower back throbbed each time I bent down, but I kept moving anyway. The roast sat in the oven. Potatoes boiled on the stove. 2 pies cooled on the counter beside a bowl of green beans I still needed to season. Upstairs, clean towels tumbled in the dryer because Melissa asked if I could freshen up the guest bathroom before her parents arrived. I paused for a moment beside the sink and looked at myself in the hallway mirror. My cheeks looked pale under the overhead light. There were faint shadows beneath my eyes I did not remember having a year ago. Retirement was supposed to make me look rested. Instead, I looked older. More worn down. Like someone slowly disappearing behind responsibilities that were no longer even acknowledged. Around 4 o'clock, Melissa walked into the kitchen carrying a scented candle and immediately frowned at the counter. "Oh no," she muttered. "You used the blue serving dish." I turned from the stove. "Yes. Is something wrong with it?" She sighed softly like I had inconvenienced her. "My mother hates blue dishes in photographs. It clashes with the dining room." Then she lifted the roast pan lid and added, "And maybe next time cook the carrots less. Dad likes them firm." For a second, I simply stared at her. Steam rose between us from the roast while rain streaked the windows behind the sink. Melissa did not sound cruel. That was the strange part. She sounded comfortable. Comfortable criticizing me inside my own kitchen, while I cooked a dinner she did not help prepare. Somewhere along the line, disrespect had become normal enough that she no longer even heard herself doing it. Before I could answer, Jason entered carrying folding chairs from the garage. "Mom, where do you want these?" he asked absent-mindedly. I almost laughed at the question because every chair in this house already belonged to me, yet somehow none of the decisions did anymore. "Anywhere is fine," I said quietly. He nodded and disappeared into the dining room without noticing the expression on my face. Melissa was already rearranging centerpieces on the table. Her parents arrived exactly at 5:30 wearing expensive wool coats still damp from the rain. Harold and Denise Carter always carried themselves like guests at a country club, even in ordinary suburban neighborhoods. Denise kissed Melissa warmly before glancing toward me. "Eleanor," she said politely. "You have been busy today." Busy. That word again. Like I was staff preparing for an event instead of family attending one. During dinner, conversation drifted around me in circles that rarely stopped long enough to include me. Harold discussed investments with Jason. Denise complimented Melissa's decorating choices even though nearly every decoration in the room had belonged to Robert and me long before Melissa entered the family. Claire arrived late carrying a bottle of wine and immediately handed me her coat without asking. Can you hang this up, Mom? She said while typing a text message. I stood there for half a second holding her wet coat in my hands before silently walking it to the hallway closet. Sophie sat beside me at dinner swinging her feet beneath the chair while everyone else talked over one another. At one point she tugged lightly on my sleeve. Grandma, she whispered, when do you get to sit down? I looked at her small face, so serious and confused, and felt something tighten painfully in my chest. Because she noticed. Out of everyone in that room, the 10-year-old child was the only one noticing I never stopped moving. Halfway through dessert, Denise smiled toward Melissa and said, I do not know what you would do without Eleanor helping so much. Melissa laughed lightly before taking a sip of wine. Honestly, neither do we. She basically runs everything for us now. Jason chuckled. Claire nodded. Nobody looked at me. Nobody saw the way my fingers tightened around the coffee mug. The way heat suddenly rose behind my eyes. Runs everything for us. Not because they loved me. Not because they valued me. Because I made their lives easier. After dinner ended, everyone migrated into the living room, while I stayed behind scraping plates into the trash and loading the dishwasher alone. Their laughter drifted down the hallway in warm bursts, while soapy water stung the dry skin on my hands. I listened to my family enjoying the evening I created for them without once wondering why I was not beside them. The kitchen smelled like coffee grounds and dish soap. Rain continued tapping softly outside. And standing there at the sink with my sleeves rolled up and my back aching, I finally understood something I had spent months trying not to see. They did not treat me this way because they hated me. They treated me this way because I had quietly taught them that I would always say yes. 2 days later, I woke up with a sharp pain running across my lower back and down my left leg. At first I tried ignoring it the way I ignored most things lately. I stood carefully beside the bed waiting for the stiffness to ease, while weak morning sunlight slipped through the curtains. The digital clock on my nightstand read 6:12 a.m. outside. The neighborhood was quiet except for a distant lawn sprinkler clicking rhythmically somewhere down the street. I pressed one hand against my back and slowly walked downstairs to make coffee. Every step hurt. The kitchen felt unusually cold that morning. I wrapped both hands around the mug for warmth and stood silently by the sink while the ache spread deeper through my hips. For the first time in months, exhaustion settled over me so heavily that even standing upright felt difficult. My phone buzzed before I finished half the coffee. Melissa. Can you pick Sophie up early today? She has a dentist appointment at 4:30. I closed my eyes briefly. Then another message appeared from Jason. Also, can you stop by the pharmacy? Melissa needs her prescription. Not one word asking how I was doing. Not one pause to consider whether I might already have plans or simply not feel well. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing slowly with stiff fingers. My back is hurting badly today. I do not think I can manage driving around this afternoon. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then disappeared. Then came Jason's response. Can it wait until tomorrow? Melissa really needs help today. I read the message twice because part of me still could not believe it. My back is hurting badly today. Can it wait until tomorrow? Not concern. Not sympathy. Just inconvenience. I sat down carefully at the kitchen table and suddenly felt tears sting my eyes so fast it startled me. I was not someone who cried easily. Years in emergency rooms had hardened me against panic and chaos. I had held strangers' hands while they received terrible news. I had comforted frightened families at 3 in the morning under fluorescent hospital lights. But sitting there alone in my silent kitchen, while my own son treated my pain like a scheduling conflict, broke something small and quiet inside me. Around noon I forced myself to drive to the grocery store because the refrigerator was nearly empty. Walking through the aisles felt strangely difficult. Every movement pulled painfully at my back. I moved slowly past shelves of soup cans and cereal boxes while younger shoppers rushed around me without noticing. Near the produce section, I heard someone call my name. Eleanor. I turned carefully and saw Margaret Lewis standing beside a cart full of chrysanthemums and canned pumpkin filling. Margaret had worked with me at St. Mary's for almost 20 years before retiring last spring. She wore a thick green sweater and bright lipstick that somehow always looked cheerful even on gray days. "Well," she said softly after seeing my face, "you look exhausted." I tried smiling. "I am fine." Margaret gave me the kind of look only old friends can give. The kind that quietly says, "Stop lying to me." "How long has it been since you did something just for yourself?" she asked. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I genuinely did not know. Margaret guided me toward the small cafe inside the grocery store and bought me tea before I could protest. We sat beside the window while rain clouds gathered outside again. "Retirement is supposed to give your life back," she said while stirring honey into her cup. "Not turn you into unpaid labor." I stared down at the steam curling from my tea. "They need me," I said weakly. Margaret leaned back slowly. "No, Eleanor. They rely on you. That is different." Her words settled heavily between us. Because deep down, I already knew she was right. Love and dependence had become tangled together so tightly inside my family that I no longer knew where one ended and the other began. When I returned home later that afternoon, Sophie was sitting alone on my front porch steps with her backpack beside her. My heart jumped. "Sweetheart, what are you doing here?" She stood quickly. "Daddy dropped me off because Mommy had to show a house." I looked toward the empty driveway. Jason was already gone. Sophie studied my face carefully. "Grandma, are you sick?" I hesitated. "Just tired." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I made this at school." It was a crayon drawing of my kitchen. Sophie had drawn herself sitting at the table while I stood at the stove wearing an apron. Behind me were piles of dishes and laundry baskets. At the top she had written carefully in uneven letters, "Grandma works harder than everybody." I stared at the picture while something cold moved through my chest. Children tell the truth before the world teaches them not to. And in that moment, holding that drawing in my trembling hands while my back ached and the house waited silently behind me, I realized even Sophie could see what I had spent months trying to deny. That night, after Sophie went upstairs to watch cartoons in the guest room, I sat alone at the kitchen table staring at her drawing beneath the yellow light above the stove. The paper looked ordinary. Cheap school art paper with crooked crayon lines and fingerprints smudged near the corners. But I could not stop looking at the little figure she had drawn standing at the stove. Me. Apron tied around my waist. Arms stretched toward pots and pans while everyone else sat comfortably waiting to be served. "Grandma works harder than everybody." The words echoed through my head long after the dishwasher finished running, and the house fell completely silent. I thought about all the years before retirement. The birthdays I missed because of double shifts. The Christmas mornings I came home exhausted from overnight emergency room duty, but still managed to cook breakfast before the children woke up. I remembered standing beside hospital beds holding strangers' hands, while my own family waited for dinner at home. Back then, sacrifice felt meaningful. It felt like building something. But now, sitting alone at 68 years old with aching joints and a silent phone unless somebody needed a favor, I began wondering whether I had simply trained everyone around me to believe my needs always came last. Around 10:30, Jason finally came to pick Sophie up. He walked into the kitchen carrying his car keys and talking before he fully stepped through the doorway. "Sorry I am late. Traffic near downtown was terrible." Then he noticed the heating pad wrapped around my lower back. "You still hurting?" I looked at him quietly. "Yes." He nodded once, distracted already. "You should probably stretch more." "Stretch more?" As if years of exhaustion could be solved with yoga and bottled water. Sophie ran downstairs hugging her backpack against her chest. Before leaving, she turned back toward me. "Good night, Grandma." Then she hesitated. "Do you want me to stay tomorrow too?" Something inside me tightened painfully because even she assumed I would still be here waiting. Still available. Still ready. "Not tomorrow, sweetheart," I said softly. "Grandma needs a quiet day." Jason glanced up from his phone then. "Tomorrow," he repeated. "I thought you were helping Melissa organize the garage." I folded Sophie's drawing carefully and slid it into the kitchen drawer beside old takeout menus and spare batteries. "I am not." Jason frowned slightly. "But Melissa already planned around that." "Planned around that?" "Around me. Around my time. Around my body and energy and life as though they belonged to everyone else automatically." I stood slowly from the chair, my back protesting sharply. "Then Melissa will need another plan." Silence settled between us. Small but heavy. Jason looked genuinely confused, almost offended, like he could not understand why this conversation suddenly felt uncomfortable. "Mom," he said carefully, "Melissa has a lot going on right now." I stared at him for several seconds. "So do I." The words surprised even me. Because I could not remember the last time I said something without immediately softening it to protect someone else's feelings. Jason opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. Sophie looked nervously between us, clutching her backpack straps. Finally Jason sighed. "Fine. Forget it." Then he grabbed Sophie's coat and headed toward the front door with the irritated body language of someone denied a convenience rather than someone worried about his mother. After they left, I locked the door and leaned against it for a long moment. The house felt unfamiliar in the quiet that followed. Not lonely exactly. Just still. Like something had finally stopped spinning fast enough for me to hear my own thoughts again. The next morning I woke up later than usual. Sunlight poured across the bedroom floor in long golden stripes, and for once I did not immediately reach for my phone. I stayed in bed listening to distant birds outside the window and the soft ticking of the ceiling fan. No alarms. No schedules. No school pickup times. The feeling was so unfamiliar it almost made me uncomfortable. By noon, 3 missed calls sat on my phone. 2 from Melissa. 1 from Claire. There was also a text message from Jason. "Melissa is upset." I stared at the screen while sipping coffee on the back porch wrapped in a blanket against the October chill. Leaves drifted slowly across the yard Robert once spent entire weekends maintaining with perfect care. For the first time in months, nobody was inside my house asking for something. The silence felt strange. But it also felt honest. Around 3 in the afternoon, Margaret called. "How are you feeling?" she asked immediately. I looked out at the empty backyard and answered truthfully for the first time in a very long time. I said slowly, I finally realized I am tired of being useful to people who stopped seeing me as a person. 3 days passed before I answered another phone call from Melissa. During those 3 days, I did something I had not done in years. I lived according to my own schedule. I slept until 8 in the morning without guilt. I drank coffee slowly while sitting on the back porch wrapped in Robert's old wool blanket watching red and gold leaves scatter across the yard. I took walks through the neighborhood without rushing home to start somebody else's laundry or prepare somebody else's dinner. The first day felt uncomfortable. The second felt unfamiliar. By the third day, it began feeling peaceful. That Thursday afternoon, I drove 30 minutes north to a small lakeside town Margaret recommended years ago. The place was called Pine Hollow. Tiny shops lined the main street beneath strings of warm lights already glowing against the early dusk. The air smelled like cedar wood and chimney smoke. I parked beside the lake and sat quietly inside the car for several minutes watching ripples move across the dark water while geese drifted slowly near the shore. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody expected anything from me there. For the first time in a very long while, I felt invisible in the best possible way. I checked into a small bed and breakfast with faded floral wallpaper and an elderly golden retriever sleeping near the fireplace in the lobby. The owner handed me an old-fashioned brass room key and smiled warmly. "You here visiting family?" she asked casually. I hesitated before answering. "No. Just resting." That night I ate clam chowder and warm bread alone at a quiet restaurant overlooking the water. A young couple laughed softly near the window while an older man read a newspaper beside the bar. Nobody interrupted my meal asking for favors. Nobody handed me coats or grocery lists or schedules. I sat there listening to low jazz music and realized how tense my body had become over the past year. Even my shoulders hurt less away from home. Around 9:30 my phone finally rang again. Jason. I watched his name glow against the screen, while the restaurant lights reflected softly across the lake outside. Then I silenced the call and slipped the phone back into my purse. The next morning there were 7 missed calls. 4 from Melissa. 2 from Claire. 1 from Jason. Along with several texts. "Where are you? We have been trying to reach you. Sophie needs picking up today." The last message came from Melissa. "This is really inconsiderate, Eleanor." I stared at that sentence for a long time, while sitting beside the inn's fireplace holding a cup of tea. Inconsiderate. The irony almost made me laugh out loud. Not once did anyone ask if I was safe. Not once did anyone ask if I was happy. Only where I was and when I planned to return to my assigned role in their lives. That afternoon, I walked through Pine Hollow carrying a paper bag filled with homemade fudge and postcards I did not actually need. I wandered into a small art gallery near the marina and stood staring at watercolor paintings of forests and snow-covered cabins. One painting showed a woman sitting alone beside a lake wrapped in a red blanket while winter birds gathered near the shore. Something about it made my chest ache quietly. The gallery owner noticed me lingering. "Beautiful, is it not?" she asked. I nodded slowly. "She looks peaceful." "Sometimes peace looks lonely to people who are afraid of being alone," the woman replied. Her words followed me long after I left the gallery. That evening, Jason finally reached me. I answered only because I knew Sophie would worry. "Mom," he said immediately, frustration pouring through the phone line, "where are you?" I sat on a wooden bench overlooking the dark lake while cold wind rustled through the trees around me. I took a few days for myself. Silence. Then Jason sighed heavily. "You could have told somebody. Would it have mattered?" Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear traffic noise behind him and Melissa speaking sharply somewhere in the background. "Melissa has been overwhelmed," he said carefully. "Everything has been chaotic since you left." "Since you left. Not since you rested. Not since you were hurting." As if I had abandoned a job instead of stepping away from responsibilities that were never supposed to belong to me in the first place. "Jason," I said quietly, "do you know the last time anyone asked me what I wanted?" He did not answer. Because he could not remember either. The lake water moved softly against the shore while distant lights shimmered across the dark surface like scattered pieces of glass. Finally Jason spoke again, his voice lower now. "Sophie misses you." My chest tightened at that because I missed her too. But missing someone and being used by them were not the same thing. And for the first time in a very long time, I was finally beginning to understand the difference. When I returned home from Pine Hollow 3 days later, the first thing I noticed was how quiet my house felt after spending time somewhere peaceful. Not empty. Just calm. The maple tree in the front yard had dropped bright red leaves across the driveway while I was gone, and the porch light I forgot to turn off still glowed faintly in the afternoon sunlight. I carried my overnight bag inside slowly, breathing in the familiar scent of old books, coffee, and cedar polish Robert always used on the floors. For the first time in months, stepping into my own home felt comforting instead of exhausting. I had barely set my keys down before someone knocked hard against the front door. Jason. I opened it to find him standing there with tired eyes and tension written across his face. Melissa stood a few feet behind him beside the car, with her arms folded tightly against her chest. You could have answered your phone more, Jason said immediately. No hello. No welcome home. I looked at him quietly. I needed space. Melissa let out a sharp breath from the driveway. Well, the timing was honestly terrible. I almost smiled hearing that because somehow my exhaustion had become an inconvenience to everybody except me. Jason stepped inside while Melissa remained near the car checking her phone dramatically every few seconds. Things have been difficult, he admitted. Sophie missed soccer practice Tuesday because Melissa had a showing, and I was stuck in meetings. I said nothing. Claire had to leave work early twice this week. Still I said nothing. Jason rubbed his forehead tiredly. We just were not expecting all this. All this. Meaning my absence. Meaning the sudden realization that their lives functioned smoothly only because I carried pieces of all of it quietly on my shoulders every day. Jason, I said softly, do you hear yourself? He frowned slightly. What does that mean? I looked toward the kitchen where Sophie's drawing still rested beside the refrigerator under a magnet shaped like Ohio. You are talking about me like I am part of the household system breaking down. Not your mother. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The clock above the stove ticked softly while rain clouds gathered outside the front windows again. Jason glanced toward the kitchen table, then finally lowered himself into a chair. Suddenly he looked older than 43. More tired. Melissa is overwhelmed, he repeated quietly, but this time his voice lacked confidence. I sat across from him slowly, my back still aching slightly from the drive home. And what about me? He opened his mouth automatically, then stopped. Because there was no answer left. A car door slammed outside. A minute later Melissa walked in carrying her purse, and irritation like visible weather around her. I do not understand why everybody is acting like we did something horrible, she said immediately. Families help each other. I looked at her calmly. Families also notice when someone is drowning. Melissa laughed once under her breath. Drowning? Eleanor, all we asked for was help with Sophie and a few errands. I stared at her for several seconds. You stopped asking a long time ago. Silence filled the room after that. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Real. Melissa shifted slightly, looking annoyed more than guilty. Jason stared down at his hands. And suddenly I realized something important. They truly had not seen it. Not fully. Convenience had slowly blinded them until my exhaustion became background noise instead of a warning sign. Then Melissa muttered something quietly I do not think she meant for me to hear. She used to enjoy helping. Used to. Past tense. Like the problem was not that they expected too much, but that I no longer performed my role cheerfully enough. Jason looked up sharply at her then. Melissa. She shrugged defensively. What? I am just saying everything was easier before. Easier before. Before I started saying no. Before I admitted I was tired. Before I stopped sacrificing myself quietly enough to keep everyone comfortable. Jason leaned back heavily in the chair and covered his face briefly with one hand. Maybe we pushed too hard, he admitted softly. The room went still after that. Because it was the first honest thing anyone had said in months. Melissa looked at him in disbelief. Seriously? He lowered his hand slowly. Look around, Mel. His voice sounded tired now instead of defensive. My mother disappeared for 3 days just to rest. I watched them both carefully then. Melissa angry because her support system was failing. Jason finally beginning to understand the cost of what they had taken for granted. And for the first time in a very long while, I did not rush to make the moment easier for everyone else. I simply sat there quietly while the truth settled across the room like dust finally visible in sunlight. Winter arrived early that year. By the second week of November, frost coated the neighborhood lawns each morning, and the maple tree outside my kitchen window stood almost bare against the pale Ohio sky. Life slowly settled into something different after the conversation with Jason and Melissa. Not perfect. Not magically repaired. But different. The phone calls became less demanding. Claire stopped dropping laundry baskets at my front door without asking first. Melissa no longer sent grocery lists like instructions to an employee. The changes were small, awkward even, like people learning how to walk carefully through a room they once rushed across without looking down. One Saturday morning, Jason came by alone carrying 2 coffees from the diner near my house. I noticed immediately that he knocked instead of using the garage code. That small sound at the front door almost made me emotional. "Thought you might want breakfast," he said quietly when I opened it. We sat together at the kitchen table while steam curled from paper cups between us. Sunlight stretched softly across the countertops and somewhere outside a snowblower rumbled faintly down the street. Jason looked older lately. More thoughtful. "Melissa started using one of those meal delivery services," he said after a while. "Turns out dinner does not magically appear every night." I smiled faintly into my coffee. Jason rubbed his hands together nervously before speaking again. "I think I got too comfortable, Mom." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. "I know you did," I answered gently. He nodded once, staring down at the table. "I guess after Dad died and then you retired, you always seemed so capable. Like you could handle everything." I looked toward the living room where Robert's old reading chair still sat beside the lamp he used every evening for 23 years. "Being capable does not mean being endless," I said softly. Jason swallowed hard and looked away for a second. The silence between us felt sad but honest in a way our conversations had not felt for a very long time. A week later, I drove back to Pine Hollow. Only this time, I stayed longer. I rented a small lakeside cottage for the month of December using money I had once planned to spend remodeling my upstairs bathroom. The cottage had creaky wood floors, knitted blankets folded beside the fireplace, and large windows overlooking the frozen lake. Every morning I woke up to the quiet sound of snow falling across the water. I took long walks through town wearing thick boots and Robert's old leather gloves. I started watercolor classes at the community center on Tuesdays. Terrible watercolor classes, if I am being honest. My trees looked like green clouds and my lake reflections resembled spilled paint. But nobody there expected anything from me except participation. There was something strangely healing about being bad at something simply because I was finally doing it for myself. Sophie called often during those weeks. Sometimes just to tell me about school projects or funny things her cat did. One evening she held up a new drawing during a video call. This time the picture showed me sitting beside the lake with a paintbrush in my hand and a bright red scarf around my neck. At the top she had written carefully, "Grandma looks happy now." I stared at the screen for a long moment before smiling. I think Grandma is learning how to be. Christmas arrived quietly that year. Instead of hosting dinner for 15 people while rushing between ovens and sinkfuls of dishes, I accepted an invitation to Margaret's house. We ate pot roast beside her fireplace while old jazz records played softly in the background. Nobody handed me coats. Nobody asked me to refill drinks or scrub pans afterward. We simply talked and laughed and watched snow fall outside her living room windows. Around 9 o'clock that night, Jason called. "We miss you," he said softly after hearing my voice. I believed him this time. But missing someone was not the same thing as owning their time, their energy, or their entire identity. I love you, I told him. But I cannot go back to the way things were. The line stayed quiet for a second before he answered. I know. After we hung up, I stood near Margaret's window holding a mug of tea, while snow drifted slowly beneath the streetlights outside. My reflection stared back faintly in the glass. Silver hair. Soft wrinkles near my eyes. A woman who had spent most of her life believing love meant endless sacrifice. But standing there in the peaceful warmth of that quiet house, I finally understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. Retirement was never supposed to turn me into less of a person. If anything, it was supposed to finally give me the chance to become one again.